The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor sounded like a metronome ticking down the final seconds of my dignity. It was Christmas Eve. Beyond the thick, double-pane glass of my third-floor ICU window, Manhattan was a snow-dusted snow globe. I knew, even without looking, that the streets were lined with twinkling fairy lights, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and the distant, joyous swell of carols. Families were gathering around roaring fireplaces, wrapped in the warmth of unconditional love. Inside my sterile, aggressively white room, the air smelled of bleach, iodine, and impending death. And my family? They were busy negotiating the price of my life. Through the heavy, suffocating haze of intravenous fentanyl, I felt a sharp, hollow ache in my lower left abdomen. It was a phantom pain, yet entirely real. The exact spot where, 3 years ago, a surgical team had cut me open and removed my left kidney. I had given it to my grandfather, Elias Montgomery. The very same grandfather who, realizing the absolute rot that infected our bloodline, had recently bypassed my parents and left me a $48 million trust fund. He left it to me simply because the rest of them had bluntly, shamelessly refused to save him. My mother, Arabella Ravenscroft, stepped into my blurred line of vision. Even in the harsh, unflattering glow of the hospital fluorescence, she looked impeccably put together. Her tailored tweed jacket was immaculate, her ash blonde hair coiffed into a severe, elegant sweep. She didn't look like a mother holding a vigil for her dying daughter. She looked like a CEO about to finalize a hostile takeover. She reached into her designer handbag and produced a heavy, gold-plated pen. I watched, trapped in a body that refused to obey my commands, as she slid the pen into the hands of my husband, Valerian Thorne. "Sign it, Valerian." Her voice was a low, urgent hiss, devoid of any maternal warmth. "Sign the conservatorship papers. To declare me medically incompetent. To state on the public record that my brain was irreparably damaged. To take absolute, undisputed control of my fortune. And Valerian? The man who had stood before an altar 5 years ago, looking into my eyes and vowing to protect me in sickness and in health, he didn't even flinch. He didn't ask for a second medical opinion. He didn't shed a single tear. He merely clicked the pen, preparing to sign my life away, while his free hand remained wrapped tightly around the slender waist of my younger sister, Celestine. They thought I couldn't hear them. They thought they had successfully buried the useless, unloved daughter on Christmas Eve. But they made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. They forgot I was still breathing. My name is Isolde Ravenscroft, and this is the story of how I bought my family's absolute, inescapable ruin. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end. To truly comprehend the sheer, unadulterated depravity of the scene unfolding in that hospital room, you have to understand the toxic soil from which my family grew. We were a dynasty built on a foundation of flawless appearances and profound emotional bankruptcy. We were a house of cards, meticulously glued together by designer labels, exclusive country club memberships, and a terrifying generational lack of empathy. My father, Dominic Ravenscroft, was a mid-level real estate developer who spent considerably more time developing his backswing on the golf course than his moral compass. He viewed people entirely as assets or liabilities. Arabella was a socialite whose heart pumped ice water and vintage champagne. She collected charities the way other women collected shoes, for the optics, never for the cause. And then there was Celestine, beautiful, vapid, and entirely ruthless. She was the golden child, 5 years my junior, and light years ahead in our parents' affections. She possessed the kind of striking, symmetrical beauty that made people excuse her cruelty. She was a budding social media influencer, treating life as an endless series of curated photo opportunities where everyone else was merely a prop. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment, the archivist, the quiet one who preferred the dusty, honest pages of historical records and financial ledgers to the fake plastic smiles of their endless galas. I wasn't ugly, but I lacked Celestine's loud, demanding presence. I was useful for organizing their schedules and doing their taxes, but I was never cherished. The true, unbridgeable fracture in our family occurred 3 years prior to this Christmas Eve. The patriarch of our twisted lineage, my grandfather Elias, fell critically ill. End-stage renal failure. The doctors were grim. They said he needed a kidney transplant immediately, or he wouldn't survive the month. Arabella, his own flesh and blood, wept beautifully in the transplant coordinator's office. She dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, claiming her blood pressure was simply too unstable to survive the trauma of donating an organ. Celestine threw a genuine foot-stomping tantrum in the hospital corridor, screaming that a 6-inch surgical scar would ruin her modeling portfolio and completely destroy her upcoming swimwear campaign. Dominic and Valerian stood by the door, impatiently checking their luxury watches, entirely indifferent to the dying old man in the bed. They were already mentally calculating the inheritance tax. I was the only one who stayed behind. I was the only one who quietly asked the nurse where the testing facility was. We were a perfect match. The surgery was brutal. Because I wasn't naturally robust, my recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl. I remember waking up in the post-op recovery ward, my throat raw and stinging from the breathing tube, my side burning with an intensity that made me gasp for air. I reached out blindly, my fingers searching for the reassuring warmth of my husband's hand. Instead, I grasped empty, cold air. When my vision cleared, I saw Valerian sitting in the far corner armchair. He was aggressively typing on his phone, his jaw set in a tight line of annoyance. He didn't look up when I moaned. He was furious that my martyr complex had forced him to miss an exclusive weekend yacht party in the Hamptons. Arabella, Dominic, and Celestine weren't even in the state. They had flown to Aspen for a ski trip, claiming the emotional toll of Elias's illness was simply too much for their delicate nerves to bear. Elias survived. And in those quiet, sterile hours of his recovery, when I sat by his bedside reading to him from old leather-bound biographies, he saw my family for exactly what they were. Parasites waiting for the host to die. When Elias passed away peacefully in his sleep just weeks before my accident, the reading of his will was a spectacle I will carry with me to the grave. We sat in the heavy, mahogany-paneled office of his longtime attorney, Harrison Sterling. Dominic and Arabella leaned forward in their leather wingback chairs, practically salivating, while Celestine audibly browsed online for a custom-built sports car. Harrison, a man who possessed the warmth of a glacier, cleared his throat and read Elias's final directives. To his daughter Arabella, his son-in-law Dominic, and his granddaughter Celestine, Elias left a specific, highly intentional sum, exactly $1 each. The heavy silence in the room shattered. Arabella shrieked, her flawless composure disintegrating into raw, ugly greed. Dominic leaped from his chair, threatening to sue, his face mottled with purple rage. But Harrison simply raised a calm, manicured hand. In American inheritance law, leaving a specific direct heir exactly $1 is the ultimate legal checkmate. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the deceased was of sound mind, remembered their heirs perfectly well, and deliberately chose to disinherit them. It makes the will practically bulletproof against any desperate claims of senility or manipulation. Then Harrison turned his steel-gray eyes to me. Elias had placed his entire empire, the Montgomery Luxury Group, alongside $48 million in liquid, untethered cash assets, into a blind trust. And he named me, the quiet archivist, as the sole beneficiary and managing trustee. The look of pure, unadulterated hatred that crossed my mother's face in that moment was visceral. Valerian didn't look at me with pride. He looked at me with a sudden, terrifying, predatory hunger. They didn't see a grieving granddaughter who had just lost her only ally. They saw a heavily fortified vault, and they realized with mounting panic that they didn't have the combination. A month later, driving home from the archives in a sudden, blinding winter blizzard, a massive commercial freight truck swerved violently across the icy center line. It crushed my small sedan against the concrete median like a discarded soda can. The impact was deafening. It shattered both of my legs, fractured 4 ribs, and caused massive internal bleeding. Because I only had 1 kidney, my body's filtration system was immediately overwhelmed. My system went into acute shock. My remaining kidney struggled, failed, and plunged me into a deep, precarious coma. And that brings us back to the ICU on the holiest night of the year. I was trapped in a nightmare of locked-in syndrome. My eyelids were incredibly heavy, open just enough to let in a sliver of harsh light. My body was paralyzed by severe physical trauma and a steady, numbing drip of painkillers. But my hearing was crystal clear. My mind was sharp, racing with a frantic, animalistic panic. Her heart rate is stabilizing, but her neurological responses are practically non-existent, a voice murmured near the foot of my bed. It belonged to Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the chief of surgery. I had met him once at one of Arabella's lavish charity fundraisers. He was a man known more for his tailored Italian suits and his expensive country club memberships than his adherence to the Hippocratic Oath. "She only has 1 kidney, Arthur." Arabella's voice cut through the rhythmic beeping of the machines. It was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of sorrow. "The toxins have flooded her brain. You said so yourself earlier. The oxygen deprivation during the extraction from the wreck. It's irreversible, isn't it? She's essentially gone. There was a heavy, pregnant pause. Medically speaking, Mrs. Ravenscroft, considering her current Glasgow coma scale, it is highly likely she will remain in a persistent vegetative state. The cost of maintaining her on life support, combined with the extensive reconstructive surgeries required for her shattered legs, it would be astronomical, and frankly, with very little hope of a meaningful recovery. We simply can't put her through that, Dominic added smoothly, instantly adopting his best, most practiced grieving father tone. It's inhumane to keep her trapped like this. Valerian, son, you have to do what's right for her. You have to make the hard choice. I felt a subtle shift in the air near the right side of my bed. Valerian sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound that made my stomach churn. It breaks my heart. I love her. But I can't be selfish. I have to let her go. Before we discuss removing the ventilator and palliative care, there is the immediate matter of her estate, Dominic pressed, his voice dropping an octave, slipping seamlessly from fake grief into brutal business. As her legal husband, Valerian, you have the right, the obligation, really, to petition for an emergency medical and financial conservatorship. Given her diminished capacity, she can no longer manage the Montgomery Trust. The court will grant it to you, with Arabella and me acting as co-conservators to ensure the family legacy is protected from mismanagement. A conservatorship. The word hung in the sterile air like a guillotine blade suspended by a thread. They weren't just giving up on my life. They were legally, systematically stripping me of my human rights. They were going to declare me incompetent, a living ghost, a broken piece of furniture, solely so they could legally raid the $48 million Elias had trusted me to protect. I have the emergency petition right here, Arabella whispered. I heard the crisp rustle of heavy legal parchment. Arthur has already signed the medical affidavit confirming her permanent, irreversible brain damage. The duty judge is a friend of Dominic's. He will rubber stamp this the moment the courthouse opens tomorrow morning. My mind screamed. How much? How much had they paid him? How much of my inheritance had they promised Dr. Pendleton to write a medical death sentence for a woman who was fully conscious, screaming silently behind paralyzed vocal cords? I felt Valerian lean over me. I could smell his expensive cologne, the exact bottle I had bought him for our 5th anniversary just a month ago. Give me the pen, he muttered. The scratch of the gold nib against the thick paper was the loudest, most agonizing sound in the world. With a few swift strokes, my husband sold me to my abusers. Good boy, Arabella purred. Then I felt a weight shift on the edge of my mattress. Someone casually brushed a tangled lock of hair from my sweaty forehead. The touch wasn't gentle. It was possessive. It felt like a claim of ownership. It's just so sad, Celestine's voice chimed in, dripping with a saccharine, fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. She looks terrible in this lighting. Her skin is practically gray. I felt Valerian's hand move from the bedside table. He didn't reach for my hand. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he pulled Celestine closer to his side. I heard the soft, sickening sound of a kiss. A deep, familiar kiss. Right there, hovering mere inches over my broken, bleeding body. You've been so incredibly strong, Val, Celestine whispered, her breath ghosting over my cheek. We'll get through this nightmare. Together. I know, baby, Valerian murmured back, his voice thick with a twisted kind of affection he hadn't shown me in years. I'm just glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you. The betrayal hit me harder than the 2-ton freight truck ever could. My husband and my sister. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? While I was working late at the archives, analyzing historical data to build a future for us, they had been making a complete mockery of my marriage. While I lay bleeding in the snow, they were probably in my bed. Suddenly, cold, sharp fingers grabbed my left hand. Arabella. She didn't hesitate. She didn't offer a word of comfort. She forcefully yanked my platinum wedding band over my swollen, bruised knuckle. I felt the friction burn my skin, a sharp sting of pain, but my body refused to flinch. She won't be needing this anymore, Arabella stated pragmatically, examining the diamond under the hospital lights. And this, I felt her manicured hands at the nape of my neck, fumbling roughly with the delicate gold clasp of the antique diamond pendant Elias had given me on my wedding day. It was a priceless family heirloom, passed down through generations of Montgomery women. Arabella had begged, pleaded, and threatened Elias for it for decades, but he had steadfastly refused her, telling her to her face that it belonged to a woman with a soul. The cold chain slipped away from my collarbone. "Turn around, darling," Arabella said softly, her voice suddenly sweet. "Let Mommy put this on you. It suits your skin tone so much better anyway." "Oh, Mom, it's absolutely gorgeous," Celestine gasped in delight. "Do you think the lighting in here is good enough for a quick video update? My followers have been so worried about my mental health during this horrific family tragedy." "Just be quick about it, sweetie. Make sure you look appropriately devastated," Dominic advised from the corner of the room. Tears equal engagement. I lay there, a silent prisoner in my own flesh. I listened to my sister adjust her portable ring light. I listened to my husband murmur words of comfort to his mistress. I listened to my parents divide my assets and my jewelry like vultures picking over a fresh carcass. They didn't see a daughter, a sister, or a wife lying in that bed. They saw a payday. As the hours dragged on into the deep, dark, freezing abyss of Christmas morning, the sheer adrenaline and pure, unadulterated rage burning in my veins began to burn through the thick fog of the narcotics. The feeling in my fingertips returned not as a tingle, but as a faint, painful, prickling sensation. The room had gone quiet. Celestine had left an hour ago to meet friends for a stress relief holiday brunch. Dominic and Arabella had gone back to their luxury penthouse to prepare for a Christmas Day gala they absolutely refused to cancel, citing the need to maintain appearances. Valerian was supposed to be keeping watch over my final hours, but he was slumped in the vinyl armchair, snoring softly, exhausted from the sheer effort of feigning grief. I forced my heavy eyelids to flutter. The harsh fluorescent light was blinding, stinging my corneas. I tried to swallow, but the thick plastic intubation tube gagged me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't sit up. The heavy plaster cast encasing my shattered legs felt like literal concrete blocks pinning me to the mattress. Then I heard heavy, urgent footsteps in the hallway outside my room. "We need to arrange the private medical transport for first thing tomorrow morning." Dominic's voice drifted through the partially open door. He must have returned to finalize the logistics of my disappearance. He was speaking to someone in the hall. "The psychiatric facility upstate, Shady Pines." "Yes, the one with the maximum security wing. She's prone to violent delusions. She needs to be kept in isolation. No visitors. No outside contact whatsoever." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that freezes your marrow. A psychiatric facility. Isolation. And the lead orthopedic surgeon called again about her legs. Valerian's voice joined in, groggy and irritated. He must have walked out to the hall to meet Dominic. "He wants to schedule the titanium rod insertion for Tuesday. He says if we wait any longer, the bone fragmentation will be permanent." "Cancel it," Dominic ordered ruthlessly, without a second of hesitation. "Tell him the family declines the surgery due to her terminal neurological state. Standard plaster casting is fine. If the bones don't heal correctly and she can never walk again, it hardly matters. She's never leaving that facility anyway. Why waste hundreds of thousands of dollars of our money on a cripple?" "Understood," Valerian replied, his tone devoid of any emotion, any hesitation, any memory of the woman he once claimed to love. They were going to lock me in a padded room and leave me there to rot in the dark, crippled and silenced forever. Panic, primal, terrifying, and suffocating seized my chest. The heart monitor beside me began to beat faster, betraying my rising consciousness. I forced myself to take slow, agonizingly measured breaths against the forced rhythm of the mechanical ventilator. I commanded my heart to slow its frantic, terrified beating. The rhythmic chirping of the monitor gradually steadied, settling back into a deceptive lull. If I panicked, if they saw the green line spiking erratically on the screen, they would know. They would know the lights were on inside this broken house. They would simply order a heavier dose of sedatives, and I would wake up strapped to a bed in the maximum security wing of Shady Pines, a prisoner in my own mind for the rest of my natural life. I needed a weapon. I needed a lifeline. And I needed it tonight, before the sun rose on Christmas Day. I shifted my eyes to the right, the only movement I could manage without triggering a wave of nausea. The heavy wooden door to my room pushed open with a soft squeak of hinges. It wasn't Arthur Pendleton. It wasn't my husband. It was a young nurse in wrinkled, light blue scrubs. Her name tag read, Clara, ICU intern. She had kind, exhausted brown eyes and dark circles that spoke of a grueling holiday shift. She didn't carry the arrogant, polished cruelty of Pendleton's seasoned, corrupted staff. She looked like someone who still believed in saving lives. This was my only chance, My absolute final roll of the dice. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left in my battered, medically suppressed body and channeled it into my right hand. The metal bed rail was cool and unforgiving against my skin. Slowly, painfully, fighting against the heavy blanket of the pain medication, I lifted my index finger. The effort was astronomical. It felt as though I were trying to move a boulder with a single muscle. My fingernail clicked against the stainless steel. It was weak. Too weak. Clara didn't notice. She was busy checking the IV bags, her brow furrowed as she noted the fluid levels on her digital tablet. I squeezed my eyes shut, drawing on the deepest reserves of my anger, the image of my sister wearing my necklace, the sound of my husband's kiss over my body. I opened my eyes and tried again, hitting the metal with as much force as I could physically muster. 3 sharp taps. Clara paused. Her stylus hovered over the screen. She tilted her head, listening. I stared directly at her. I opened my eyes as wide as the swelling would allow, locking my gaze intensely with hers. I needed her to see past the bruises, past the tubes, past the medical charts that declared me a lost cause. I needed her to see the sheer, unadulterated terror and desperate lucidity screaming in my expression. I wasn't brain dead. I was a hostage. Using the international Morse code I had learned years ago during an archival research project, I began to tap rhythmically on the rail. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps. S-O-S. Clara gasped softly, the sound catching in her throat. The stylus clattered from her hand, bouncing off the linoleum floor. She took a hesitant step toward the bed, leaning over me, her eyes widening in absolute shock as she registered the fierce, undeniable awareness in my stare. You're awake? She whispered, her voice trembling, instinctively looking over her shoulder toward the hallway. You understand me? I blinked once. A slow, deliberate, heavy blink. Clara brought a trembling hand to her mouth. The chief of surgery, Dr. Pendleton, he documented that you were entirely unresponsive. They signed the conservatorship affidavits not an hour ago. They put a do not resuscitate order on your file. I felt a single hot tear slide down my cheek, stinging the cuts on my face. I couldn't sob, I couldn't beg. I just moved my bruised finger again, abandoning the Morse code. Instead, I began to trace numbers on the stark white hospital bedsheet. 9, 1, 7. It was a New York area code. Clara watched my trembling finger intently. She was smart. She didn't ask useless questions. She pulled a ballpoint pen from her scrub pocket and frantically began writing the numbers down on the palm of her hand as I painfully traced them. It took me 3 agonizing, sweat-inducing minutes to trace the 10 digits of Harrison Sterling's private, unlisted emergency line. The line Elias had told me to use only if the world was ending. Tonight, my world was ending. When I finished the final digit, I tapped the rail once more, then darted my eyes frantically toward the door where my husband was presumably standing guard. Clara understood the assignment. Her face went pale, but her jaw set with a fierce protective determination. She knew that if Pendleton caught her, her medical career was over before it even began, but she also knew she was looking at a murder in progress. I can't use the room phone, it's tracked, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I'll make the call from the basement laundry facility. Just hold on. Please, just hold on. She slipped out of the room like a ghost, just seconds before the door swung wide open. Valerian walked back in, holding a steaming cup of stale cafeteria coffee. He glanced at me, his eyes washing over my tear-stained face with complete and utter indifference. He didn't see the tracks of my silent weeping. He didn't see a human being. He saw a down payment on a new life. He sighed, a sound of profound boredom, and sat back down in the vinyl armchair, pulling out his phone to text his mistress, completely oblivious to the fact that a ticking time bomb had just been planted under his future. The next 3 hours were the longest, most excruciating hours of my entire existence. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like a decade. I lay there in the sterile silence, waiting for a rescue that might never come, or waiting for the morning light that would bring the transport to the asylum. As the night wore on, the medication began to wear off entirely. The pain in my shattered legs flared into a roaring, blinding fire. It felt as though someone were grinding glass into my bone marrow. The fractured ribs screamed with every mechanical push of the ventilator. But I welcomed the agony. I embraced it. The pain meant I was alive. The pain was fuel. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the heavy double doors of the ICU didn't just open. They were violently, aggressively shoved apart, hitting the wall with a thunderous crash that shattered the quiet of the ward. The commotion jolted Valerian awake. He jumped to his feet, spilling his coffee across his expensive shoes. "Hey! What the hell? You can't be in here. Visiting hours are—" His voice died in his throat, replaced by a pathetic, choked gasp. Striding into the room was Harrison Sterling. He wasn't wearing his usual impeccable three-piece courtroom suit. He wore a heavy, charcoal wool overcoat over a cashmere sweater, his silver hair slightly disheveled from the freezing wind. He looked every bit the ruthless, terrifying legal shark my grandfather had hired him to be. Flanking him were 4 massive men in tactical dark suits, private security contractors whose cold, dead eyes suggested they handled problems far worse than hospital security. And behind them, looking utterly terrified, pale, and thoroughly disheveled, was Dr. Arthur Pendleton. He was still in his silk pajamas, a heavy winter coat thrown hastily over his shoulders, being physically guided into the room by the firm grip of one of the security men. What is going on?" Valerian stammered, backing away until the back of his knees hit the armchair. Harrison ignored him completely. He walked straight to the foot of my bed. The formidable lawyer looked down at me, and for a fraction of a second, the icy exterior melted. His stern face softened when he saw my eyes, wide open, aware, and burning with a desperate, silent plea. "I received a very interesting, very urgent phone call tonight, Valerian," Harrison said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed off the tiled walls. "From a highly concerned medical professional who informed me that my client, the sole trustee of a $48 million estate, was awake, lucid, and being held against her will under falsified medical pretenses." "That's a lie!" Valerian shouted, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched panic. He looked frantically at Pendleton. "Tell him, Arthur. She's brain dead. Dominic and Arabella have the conservatorship papers. The duty judge signed them an hour ago. You have absolutely no legal authority here, Sterling. Get out before I call the police." Harrison reached into the breast pocket of his overcoat and pulled out a thick, legal document bound with a heavy red wax seal. He stepped forward and slapped the document directly against Valerian's chest with enough force to make my husband stumble backward. "That is exactly where you and your greedy, short-sighted in-laws made a spectacular miscalculation," Harrison stated, his voice dripping with lethal disdain. Elias was a highly paranoid man, but he was a brilliant one. When he established the trust, he also drafted an irrevocable medical and legal power of attorney, a dead-hand proxy. It supersedes any spouse, any parent, and any emergency conservatorship order granted by a local judge who hasn't been allowed to review the full classified trust documents. I am her absolute legal proxy. I speak for her, and I say she leaves this butchery immediately. Valerian looked like he was going to vomit. His eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an exit, a loophole, a lie that could save him. "You can't move her. She's in critical condition," Dr. Pendleton finally piped up, his voice trembling as he tried to salvage his ruined credibility. "It's strictly against medical advice. The trauma to her legs alone." Harrison slowly turned his icy, unblinking glare onto the corrupted doctor. "Dr. Pendleton, my cybersecurity team has already secured a copy of your falsified neurological reports, along with the very interesting offshore wire transfer your clinic received from Dominic's shell company yesterday afternoon. I highly suggest you remain absolutely silent right now, unless you'd prefer to explain to the State Medical Board and the FBI why you diagnosed a fully conscious woman as vegetative in exchange for a bribe." Pendleton's mouth snapped shut. All the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He knew it was over. His career, his reputation, his freedom, gone in a matter of seconds. "Get her ready for transport," Harrison ordered his men, his tone brokering no argument. Within minutes, an elite private medevac team, coordinated entirely by Harrison's limitless resources, flooded the room. They worked with terrifying military precision. They seamlessly disconnected me from the hospital's compromised monitors, hooking me up to their own state-of-the-art portable life support systems. They didn't speak to Valerian. They treated him as if he were an invisible, foul-smelling stain on the floor. Valerian stood paralyzed in the corner, his chest heaving with shallow breaths of pure panic. He watched helplessly as his golden goose, his guaranteed ticket to millions and a life of consequence-free luxury with my sister, was quite literally wheeled out from under him. The illusion of his power was shattering in real time. As the paramedics carefully pushed my stretcher toward the double doors, I made them stop. I couldn't speak, but I didn't need words. I turned my head on the pillow and looked Valerian dead in the eye. All the love, all the gentle subservience, all the quiet, desperate acceptance that had defined our marriage was completely gone. It had been burned away by the unforgiving fires of his betrayal. I didn't look at him with sorrow. I didn't look at him with fear. I looked at him with the cold, absolute, terrifying promise of destruction. Valerian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He took a stumbling step back, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to merge with the drywall. He knew. In that single, silent, prolonged stare, he knew that he hadn't just lost the money. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had awakened a monster. We moved swiftly through the empty, echoing corridors of the hospital. The wheels of the stretcher spun rapidly over the linoleum. We reached the rooftop helipad where a sleek, black, private medical helicopter was already waiting, its massive blades cutting rhythmically through the freezing, snow-filled Christmas night air. As the paramedics expertly lifted my stretcher into the heated cabin and the heavy doors slid shut, sealing out the chaotic noise of the rotors, Harrison took the seat beside me. He unbuttoned his coat and gently took my cold, trembling hand in his warm, steady one. "You're safe now," he said softly over the intercom headset, his thumb brushing my knuckles. "We're going to a private, secure facility in Switzerland. They have the best orthopedic surgeons in the world. No one will know where you are. Let them think you disappeared. Let them think they've won." I closed my eyes as the helicopter lifted off the snowy roof, banking sharply over the glowing, festive skyline of New York City. I was leaving behind my treacherous family, my coward of a husband, and the smoking wreckage of my old life. I was broken in a dozen places. I was temporarily paralyzed. I was entirely alone in the world, save for the lawyer sitting beside me. But as I listened to the steady hum of the helicopter engine carrying me away from the slaughterhouse, I had never felt more powerful. My parents, my sister, and my husband thought they were the brilliant architects of my demise. They thought they had buried me in a foundation of lies. They had no idea that they had just handed me the blueprints to build their perfect, inescapable, and utterly devastating ruin. The quiet, compliant, invisible daughter died on that hospital bed on Christmas Eve. What rose from the ashes of that betrayal was something entirely different. Something forged in the agonizing fires of trauma, fueled by the cold, calculating logic of revenge, and armed with $48 million of pure, unadulterated consequence. The game was no longer about simple survival. It was about absolute annihilation, and it was finally my turn to deal the cards. The transition from the deafening, chaotic roar of the medevac helicopter to the absolute, pristine silence of the Swiss Alps was jarring. For the first few weeks, my existence was no longer measured in days or hours, but in milligrams of intravenous pain medication and the blinding clinical flashes of surgical lights. The private facility Harrison had arranged was hidden deep within a snow-capped valley. It was an architectural marvel of glass and reinforced steel that looked more like a billionaire's secluded fortress than a rehabilitation center. There were no standard, drafty hospital gowns here, and there was absolutely no pity in the eyes of the staff. They were the most elite, ferociously expensive orthopedic reconstructive surgeons in the world, and they treated my shattered legs not as a human tragedy, but as a complex, high-stakes engineering puzzle waiting to be solved. I underwent 5 major, agonizing surgeries in the span of 3 months. They didn't just cast my broken bones, they excavated the damage. They drove surgical-grade titanium rods down the hollow, splintered centers of my femurs. They used heavy plates and dozens of precision screws to meticulously rebuild my pulverized knees and fractured shins. The physical agony of the nerve endings forcefully knitting themselves back together around cold metal was a fire that burned relentlessly, day and night. It was a kind of pain that strips away every polite, civilized layer of a human being, leaving only the raw, screaming animal beneath. There were nights when the pain was so profound, so all-encompassing, that I would bite through the thick leather strap the nurses gave me just to keep from shattering my own teeth. I would lie in the dark, bathed in a freezing sweat, staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling of my recovery suite. In those moments of absolute, suffocating despair, when I wanted nothing more than to give up, to let my heart stop and the darkness take me, I didn't pray. Instead, I thought of Valerian's hand resting comfortably on Celestine's waist. I thought of my mother casually, ruthlessly ripping the wedding band over my swollen knuckle while I lay trapped in my own flesh. I thought of my father calculating the cost of my life against a corporate balance sheet. Their betrayal became my adrenaline. Hate, I quickly and intimately learned, was a far more potent, reliable, and sustaining fuel than hope could ever be. Hope is fragile. Hate is armor. 18 months. That is exactly how long it took to forge a new woman out of the wreckage they had left behind. The physical therapy was a daily, grueling execution. I had to reteach my traumatized brain how to command my atrophied muscles. I started in a customized wheelchair, eventually graduating to a heavy metal walker, and then to forearm crutches that bruised my skin purple and yellow. The quiet, mousy archivist who used to hide her insecurities behind oversized, drab cardigans and thick glasses died somewhere between the parallel bars in the clinic's gymnasium. As my body meticulously rebuilt itself, hardened and unyielding thanks to the titanium scaffolding within, my mind underwent a similar, irreversible crystallization. I didn't spend my recovery watching television or weeping over my lost marriage. I devoured dense financial ledgers, complex corporate law textbooks, and global banking regulations from my bed. I studied the intricate, often corrupt mechanisms of high finance. If I was going to wield $48 million, I wasn't going to do it as a passive, grateful beneficiary. I was going to become an apex predator. By the 16th month, I took my first entirely unassisted steps. My gait was no longer the soft, hesitant, apologetic walk of my youth. It was measured, deliberate, and yes, it carried a slight, permanent limp, a physical, undeniable manifestation of the price I had paid for my survival. The lead surgeon gently suggested a custom orthopedic shoe to mask the irregularity. I flatly refused. I had no intention of hiding my scars. Instead, I commissioned a cane. It was not a medical aid. It was a masterpiece of intimidation. Crafted from lightweight, military-grade carbon fiber, it was sleek, structural, and entirely black. The handle was a smooth, ergonomic curve, heavily encrusted with tightly packed, flawless black diamonds. When the reinforced tungsten tip struck the polished marble floors of the clinic, it didn't sound like a woman struggling to walk. It sounded like a judge's gavel striking a heavy wooden block. Click, click, click. It was the sound of approaching consequence. When I finally checked out of the clinic on a crisp autumn morning, my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass of the lobby was entirely unrecognizable. My long, unruly, neglected hair had been chopped into a razor-sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed my face like a drawn blade. I wore a tailored, midnight blue silk suit from Milan that cost more than a luxury sedan. I didn't look like a victim who had barely survived a massacre. I looked like the architect of the next one. Harrison was waiting patiently by the black, armored town car idling in the circular driveway. Over the past 18 months, the icy, unshakable lawyer had become my most trusted confidant, my mentor, and the meticulous co-architect of my retaliation. He opened the heavy door for me, his steel gray eyes gleaming with a rare, profound respect as he took in my complete transformation. "You look ready," he murmured, his breath pluming in the cold mountain air. "I've been ready since Christmas Eve," I replied, my voice a smooth, low, steady register that no longer held a single trace of the girl who used to apologize simply for taking up space. We settled into the plush, heated leather seats as the car navigated the winding, treacherous mountain roads, heading toward the private airfield where my Gulfstream awaited. Harrison reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a slim, highly encrypted tablet, and handed it to me. "The trap is fully operational," he said, tapping the screen to unlock it, "and your family has walked right into it, completely, blissfully blind." I looked down at the digital dashboard illuminating the dim cabin. The screen displayed a real-time, comprehensive, deeply invasive map of the Ravenscroft and Thorne families' entire financial ecosystems. To the untrained eye, the charts and graphs looked like a massive, unprecedented economic boom period. But to me, reading the intricate data points, it was a beautifully orchestrated, catastrophic disaster. "Explain the mechanics to me one more time," I requested, watching a glowing red line indicating a massive credit expenditure spike occurring in real time. I want to savor the details. Harrison offered a thin, shark-like smile that didn't reach his eyes. "When your father and your husband arrogantly rushed that emergency conservatorship petition through the courts on Christmas morning, they naturally assumed they were unlocking the vault to your $48 million. They thought they had legally usurped your grandfather's will. But Elias anticipated their limitless greed. He had me bury a specific, dead-hand clause deep within the trust's foundational charter. If a conservatorship is triggered under suspicious medical circumstances or without my direct verbal consent," I prompted, reciting the dense legal jargon I had spent months memorizing, The primary liquid assets are immediately and irrevocably frozen in a sovereign offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. Harrison finished smoothly. The $48 million is completely inaccessible to anyone but you. However, according to state law, the trust is still legally obligated to maintain the standard of living of the conservators, your parents and your husband, while they ostensibly manage your ongoing vegetative care. So if the cash is frozen, where exactly are they getting the millions of dollars they've been spending for the last year and a half? I asked, though I already knew the beautiful, highly venomous answer. They are operating entirely on margin, Harrison explained, his voice practically purring with professional satisfaction. To fulfill its legal obligation without touching the frozen principal, the trust automatically partnered with a private shadow banking institution to issue them limitless lines of credit using the inaccessible $48 million as theoretical collateral. Every time Celestine buys a Birkin bag, every time Dominic covers a bad real estate investment to save his failing firm, every time Valerian leases a new Ferrari to parade around Manhattan, they aren't spending your money. I traced the edge of the tablet with a manicured nail, a cold smirk playing on my lips. They're borrowing it. Exactly. With astronomical, continuously compounding interest rates, Harrison confirmed. They believe they are spending their inheritance. They believe they won. In reality, they are accumulating a catastrophic, insurmountable mountain of debt. And the best part? I looked up from the screen, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror's reflection. I own the shadow bank. You own the shadow bank, Harrison nodded. Through a highly complex series of dummy corporations and blind LLCs registered in Delaware, we funneled a fraction of your liquid assets to quietly purchase Nemesis Holdings. You are their sole creditor. They are essentially borrowing money directly from the woman they left to die at predatory interest rates to fund the lavish, sickening lifestyle they built on your supposed grave. I leaned back against the plush leather, my eyes locked on the data streaming across the glowing screen. There was a massive transaction logged just 2 hours ago. Valerian had put a staggering down payment on a sprawling, multi-level, glass-walled penthouse in Tribeca. I tapped on the digital receipt. He had signed the mortgage using the corporate accounts of his failing real estate firm, accounts that were currently being artificially propped up by Nemesis Holdings. He thought he was building an untouchable empire for himself and my sister. He had no idea he was painstakingly building a financial prison brick by brick, and he was eagerly handing me the only key. What is their current combined debt load? I asked softly, watching the numbers tick upward like a taximeter. Combined? Your parents' fraudulent charitable foundation, Celestine's exorbitant lifestyle and travel expenses, and Valerian's highly leveraged, foolish business acquisitions? Harrison tapped a few keys, bringing up a bold, glaring red number at the bottom center of the screen. $16.4 million, and climbing by the hour. A dark, genuine laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound I hadn't made in years, and it echoed in the quiet, insulated cabin of the car, chilling in its absolute lack of warmth or mercy. They were bleeding themselves dry. They were performing for a high society that didn't truly care about them, funding their delusions of grandeur and power with an imaginary fortune. They were throwing extravagant galas, posing for paparazzi on red carpets, and pretending to mourn my tragic, vegetative state in fake, tearful interviews, all while slipping deeper and deeper into a financial abyss from which there was zero mathematical possibility of escape. Let them keep spending, I instructed, handing the tablet back to Harrison as the sleek silhouette of the private jet came into view on the snowy tarmac. Approve every single credit increase they request. Raise their limits without them even asking. Encourage the extravagance. I want them to feel completely, utterly, and entirely invincible. I want them to fly so high that when I finally cut the strings, the impact shatters them into 1,000 irreversible pieces. I gripped the diamond-encrusted handle of my cane, feeling the cold, hard, undeniable reality of the power I now held in my hands. The time for hiding in the safety of the Swiss Alps was over. The physical reconstruction of Isolde Ravenscroft was complete. It was time to return to New York. It was time to watch the rats gorge themselves on the poison. The air in the executive suite of the Montgomery Luxury Group Tower was clinically filtered, climate-controlled, and entirely soundproof. Suspended 80 floors above the chaotic, freezing streets of Manhattan, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, leaning lightly on my diamond-encrusted cane. Down there, the city was a labyrinth of frantic energy, a place where people clawed over one another for a fraction of the power I now held quietly in my gloved hands. It had been 18 months since I was medevaced out of that sterile ICU. My family, operating under the blissful, arrogant delusion that I was locked away in a maximum security psychiatric ward, had wasted absolutely no time stepping into my shoes. Or rather, into what they falsely believed was my bank account. I turned away from the window and walked toward the massive obsidian desk that dominated the center of the room. A thick, leather-bound dossier rested perfectly in the center. It was a comprehensive, painfully detailed intelligence report compiled by Harrison's team, tracking every movement, every transaction, and every public lie my family had manufactured since the night they left me for dead. I opened the dossier, the heavy pages turning with a satisfying crispness. The first section was dedicated to Valerian, my dear, devoted husband, the man who had signed my life away with a gold pen. According to the financial ledgers, Valerian was currently playing the role of the self-made, visionary real estate mogul. He had recently moved his boutique firm into a lavishly expensive commercial space in Midtown. He was throwing exorbitant, champagne-drenched launch parties, attempting to court foreign investors. But the numbers didn't lie. His firm wasn't generating profit. It was a glorified incinerator for borrowed cash. Every single one of his ambitious commercial acquisitions was heavily mortgaged through Nemesis Holdings. He was a man walking on a tightrope made of dental floss, completely unaware that I was the one holding the scissors. Then there was Celestine. I flipped to a glossy, high-definition printout of her latest magazine spread. She was draped in vintage couture, posing flawlessly in the sweeping foyer of the Tribeca penthouse she now openly shared with Valerian. The headline of the accompanying interview read, "Finding Love After Tragedy, How a Sister's Grief Built a Stronger Bond." I traced the edge of the photograph with a cold, numb finger. She was wearing my antique diamond pendant, the one Arabella had stripped from my neck while I lay paralyzed. According to the report, Celestine had built a massive social media following over the past year by monetizing my supposed demise. She routinely posted tearful, highly edited videos discussing the heartbreak of having a sister in a permanent vegetative state, asking her millions of followers for prayers. She was universally praised for her bravery, her resilience, and her impeccable fashion sense. She was living a life of absolute, unrestricted luxury, completely funded by the limitless credit lines of the shadow bank. They were beggars parading in designer clothes, and it was time to give them a subtle, terrifying reminder that credit is a privilege, not a right. I picked up my secure, encrypted smartphone and dialed a direct line to the risk management division of Nemesis Holdings. "Chairwoman," the voice on the other end answered immediately, crisp and attentive. "Locate the primary platinum card issued to Celestine Ravenscroft," I instructed, my eyes tracking a live GPS feed on my monitor that indicated her phone was currently inside a wildly exclusive, appointment-only boutique on 5th Avenue. "I want the credit limit reduced to 0, effective immediately. Do not trigger a fraud alert, simply code it as insufficient funds, and put a 10-minute hold on the customer service line." "Right away, ma'am." I hung up the phone, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. I could perfectly visualize the scene unfolding 20 blocks south. Celestine would be standing at the marble checkout counter, treating the terrified sales associates like indentured servants. She would have a mountain of exotic leather handbags, silk scarves, and perhaps a vicuña coat piled before her. She would casually, arrogantly toss her heavy metal platinum card onto the glass, expecting the usual fawning subservience. Instead, the chip reader would process the data. The machine would think for a second, and then the piercing, humiliating buzz of rejection would slice through the hushed classical music of the boutique. Declined. She would scoff, her perfectly contoured face flushing with a mixture of confusion and immediate rage. She would demand they run it again. Declined. She would pull out her backup cards, cards linked to Valerian's over-leveraged accounts. Declined. 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 The whispers of the other wealthy patrons would start. The security guard would take a subtle step closer. The illusion of her limitless wealth would crack, right there in the middle of 5th Avenue, exposing the terrifying void beneath. She would frantically call the bank, only to be placed on a looping, agonizing hold with elevator music, while the sales associates slowly, apologetically began removing the luxury goods from the counter. It was a petty, microscopic fraction of the suffering they had inflicted upon me. But psychological warfare is a game of attrition. I didn't want to kill them quickly. I wanted them to feel the air slowly, inexplicably leaving the room. I turned my attention back to the dossier, flipping to the final, most crucial section. The trap. While cutting off her credit card was a brief, satisfying amusement, I needed a weapon that would permanently, legally annihilate her. I needed a contract so ironclad, so financially devastating, that no team of lawyers in Manhattan could ever unweave it. Leclerc was the crown jewel of the Montgomery luxury group. It was a Parisian high jewelry maison with a legacy spanning 2 centuries, renowned for creating pieces that adorned royalty and A-list celebrities. It was also an entity that I now completely controlled from the shadows. A month ago, I had directed the global marketing team of Leclerc to launch a highly publicized search for a new global brand ambassador. The campaign was titled Stars of Eternity. The flagship piece was a legendary 20-carat flawless diamond choker surrounded by a galaxy of smaller stones. It was a piece of jewelry that didn't just scream wealth, it demanded worship. I knew Celestine's vanity. I knew her relentless, ravenous hunger for validation. I knew that being the face of Leclerc was the absolute pinnacle of her shallow ambitions. Through highly discreet, untraceable proxies, my executive team reached out to her talent agency. We offered her the contract of a lifetime. The compensation package was absurdly, comically generous. We guaranteed billboards in Times Square, full-page spreads in Vogue, and exclusive access to the Cannes Film Festival red carpet. It was the bait, and she had swallowed it whole. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the intercom on my desk chimed softly. "Chairwoman," my executive assistant announced, "Miss Ravenscroft has arrived at the Leclerc boardroom on the 42nd floor for the contract signing. Mr. Sterling is waiting for her inside. Feed the live security footage to my primary monitor," I ordered, settling into my high-backed leather chair and resting my hands on the handle of my cane. The massive screen on my wall flickered to life, displaying a high-definition, multi-angle view of the pristine, glass-walled boardroom 40 floors below me. Celestine strutted into the room like a conquering queen returning from a victorious war. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, a tailored white pantsuit, and an expression of pure, unfiltered entitlement. She didn't look like a woman who had experienced a humiliating credit card decline just a day prior. She looked like someone who believed this contract was her divine right, a solution to all her sudden, inexplicable cash flow problems. Harrison sat at the head of the heavy, polished mahogany conference table. He didn't stand to greet her. He merely observed her with the cold, detached fascination of a biologist examining a particularly toxic insect. "Miss Ravenscroft," Harrison said, his voice smooth, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Please take a seat. We have a lot of ground to cover." Celestine dropped her handbag onto the table and fell into a plush leather chair, crossing her legs. She didn't even bother to take off her sunglasses. "Let's skip the corporate pleasantries, Harrison. I know my worth. The brand needs a young, vibrant face to connect with the modern demographic. I'm doing you a favor. Where do I sign?" Harrison didn't flinch at her insolence. He calmly pushed a massive 80-page legal document across the reflective surface of the table. "Leclerc is thrilled to have you, Celestine," he lied seamlessly. "However, as you know, this maison is built on a foundation of absolute purity, timeless elegance, and unblemished reputation. We take our public image very, very seriously." Celestine waved her hand dismissively, examining her manicured nails. Yeah, I get it. I'm an influencer. I know how to manage a brand. Give me a pen." Harrison placed his hand firmly over the document, stopping her. "I must insist that we briefly review the stipulations, specifically the morality clause in Section 8, page 42. My eyes narrowed as I watched the screen. This was the mechanism of her execution. "It stipulates," Harrison continued, his voice ringing clearly through the hidden microphones, "that the ambassador must maintain an impeccable public and private image. Any behavior deemed scandalous, unethical, abusive, or damaging to the brand's prestigious reputation will result in immediate, unilateral termination of the contract." "Standard legal jargon," Celestine scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her dark lenses. "I don't do scandals. I'm practically America's sweetheart. My followers love me." "Furthermore," Harrison pressed on, his tone dropping to a deadly, serious register, "due to the astronomically high value of the jewelry involved and the immense capital investment of this global campaign, such a breach carries a liquidated damages penalty." Celestine paused, slightly irritated by the delay. "Okay, how much?" $20 million, Harrison stated without a single blink. "Payable immediately upon breach, and it includes a clause allowing for the immediate seizure of personal assets, real estate, and capital to satisfy the debt. $20 million. For a normal, rational human being, that number would induce immediate paralysis. It would prompt a frantic call to a team of independent lawyers. It would cause a moment of profound, sobering hesitation. But Celestine was not rational. She was poisoned by her own narcissism. She was blinded by the reflection of her own perceived greatness. She heard the words $20 million, and she didn't hear a lethal threat. She heard a validation of her immense, unparalleled worth. She assumed she was so incredibly valuable to the company that the penalty had to be astronomically high just to match her status. She didn't bother to read the specific, detailed paragraphs defining scandalous behavior. If she had actually taken 60 seconds to read the fine print, she would have seen that it explicitly included the documented psychological or physical abuse of family members, medical fraud, and public harassment, the very foundation upon which she had built her fake, glittering life. 20 million? Celestine let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. Please, I'm not going to cause a scandal. I'm going to make this company billions. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a pen, and flipped the heavy contract directly to the final page. Sign here and initial here, Harrison instructed, pointing to the dotted lines, his face a mask of absolute neutrality. I leaned forward in my chair, my heart beating in a steady, powerful rhythm. I watched as the tip of her pen touched the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of her signature being etched onto the legal document was the most beautiful melodic symphony I had heard in my entire life. It was the distinct, undeniable sound of a steel trap snapping completely and permanently shut. She smiled, a wide, predatory grin, and held up the signed contract, snapping a quick selfie with her phone. She was likely already drafting the caption in her head. Major moves. God is good. She thought she had just secured her financial future. She thought she had just cemented her status as untouchable royalty. In reality, she had just legally, voluntarily handed me the exact weapon I needed to completely, utterly, and publicly bankrupt her. Welcome to the Montgomery Luxury Group, Miss Ravenscroft, Harrison said, carefully taking the document and sliding it back into his briefcase. Just make sure the choker is polished for the launch gala next month, Celestine commanded, standing up and adjusting her suit. I want it sparkling. Oh, I assure you, Harrison replied, a dark undertone weaving through his professional demeanor. It will be a night no one in this city will ever forget. She walked out of the boardroom floating on air, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just sold her soul, her future, and her freedom to the exact woman she had left to rot in a hospital bed. I pressed a button on my desk console, turning off the monitors. The room plunged back into a quiet, meditative silence. The first piece of the puzzle was permanently locked into place. Celestine was securely chained to the floor of the sinking ship. Now it was time to turn my attention to the men who had steered it into the iceberg. It was time to look into the shadows of that winter night and unearth the horrifying, bloody truth of how I ended up in that hospital bed in the first place. The digital dissection of a human life is a remarkably sterile process. There is no blood, no physical struggle, no screaming. It happens in the absolute quiet of a server room, carried out by lines of code and relentless algorithms. In the weeks following the boardroom signing, my cybersecurity team, an elite unit composed of former intelligence operatives hired by Harrison, had systematically infiltrated the entirety of Valerian's digital existence. We didn't just hack his failing boutique real estate firm. We mapped the very DNA of his corruption. We owned his corporate servers, his encrypted offshore routing numbers, and the private cloud storage he arrogantly assumed was secure. I sat at my desk, the city skyline bruised with the purple and gray hues of an impending winter storm, watching a progress bar on my monitor reach 100%. The hostile takeover of his data was complete. We were initially looking for the standard financial discrepancies, Harrison said, stepping into my office and placing a sleek silver flash drive onto the obsidian glass of my desk. His usual stoic demeanor was fractured by a deeply unsettling rigidity. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. Evidence of the money he was laundering through your parents' charitable foundation. Falsified appraisals, tax evasion, the usual white-collar filth. I looked up from the screen, sensing the heavy, dark shift in the atmosphere. But you found something else. Yes, Harrison replied, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. Hidden beneath 3 layers of biometric encryption on his personal home server. It wasn't a financial ledger, Isolde. It was an audio file, sourced from the internal dashcam system of the luxury SUV your father leased for him 2 years ago. He didn't explain further. He simply reached out and plugged the drive into my secure terminal. He clicked a file named dec_10_archive.wav. You need to brace yourself, Harrison warned softly, taking a step back. I didn't brace myself. I thought I had already absorbed the absolute worst of their depravity. I thought the betrayal in the ICU was the bedrock of their cruelty. I was wrong. The bedrock went much, much deeper into hell. The audio crackled to life, filling my silent office with the ambient, muffled sounds of a moving vehicle, the hum of a high-end engine, the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers battling a heavy snowfall, and then the unmistakable, casual voices of my father and my husband. The lawyers confirmed it this morning. Dominic's voice boomed through the speakers, sounding frustrated, tapping his heavy signet ring against the steering wheel. Elias actually did it. The stubborn old bastard bypassed Arabella entirely. He's putting the entire liquid $48 million and the Montgomery Group voting shares into a blind trust. And he's naming Isolde as the sole trustee. There was a heavy sigh from the passenger seat. Valerian. Are you certain? Isolde? She can barely balance our household checking account without triple-checking the math. She'll freeze the capital. She won't let us touch a single cent of it. I am absolutely certain, Dominic spat, the venom in his voice palpable. She's too rigid, too obsessed with ethics. If she takes control of that trust, the Ravenscroft firm goes bankrupt by the end of the fiscal year. We are over-leveraged by $20 million, Valerian. Arabella's charity accounts are drying up. We need that Montgomery cash infusion, or we lose the penthouses, the club memberships, everything. So we contest the will, Valerian suggested, his tone pragmatic, detached. We claim Elias was suffering from dementia. We tie it up in probate court for a decade. No, Dominic shot back immediately. Sterling is too good. The will is ironclad. He left us $1 each to prevent exactly that. Probate won't work. The only way the trust dissolves and reverts to the next of kin, to Arabella, is if the primary beneficiary is declared legally incompetent or... He let the sentence hang in the heated cabin of the SUV. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a terrifying, unspoken understanding. Or if she's deceased, Valerian finished softly. There was no gasp of horror. There was no moral objection. He stated it as simply as one might state the weather. Exactly, Dominic confirmed, his voice dropping into a low, conspiratorial murmur. She works late at the Historical Archives on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The facility is in an industrial park upstate. The roads are isolated, and the forecast is predicting a massive blizzard next week. A commercial freight truck, Valerian said, the gears of the murder plot turning smoothly in his head. Those drivers work insane hours. They fall asleep at the wheel all the time in bad weather. Black ice, poor visibility. It's a tragic, unavoidable accident. I have a contact at a logistics company facing bankruptcy, Dominic continued, his tone entirely businesslike. He has a driver who owes a significant amount of money to the wrong people. For $500,000 wired to an offshore account in Belize, he'll make sure the truck crosses the center median at the exact right moment. The SUV is heavy. Her little sedan won't stand a chance. $500,000? Valerian asked, his only concern seemingly the budget. Can we pull that together? I'll liquidate the remaining charity funds tomorrow, Dominic assured him. Consider it an investment. We spend $500,000 to secure 48. It's the highest return on investment we'll ever make. Are you with me, Valerian? Or do you want to spend the rest of your life playing a mid-level broker married to a boring librarian? The windshield wipers swept across the glass. Swoosh, swoosh. Wire the money, my husband said. Make sure the driver knows her exact route. The audio file ended with a sharp click, leaving behind a silence so absolute, so suffocating, it felt as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked from the room. I sat entirely motionless in my leather chair. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My tear ducts felt as though they had been cauterized by a blowtorch. For 18 months, I had operated under the assumption that their crime was one of opportunistic greed. I believed they had simply taken advantage of a horrific, random tragedy to line their pockets. I thought they were scavengers. They weren't scavengers. They were predators. They were architects of a slaughter. They hadn't just watched me bleed in that hospital bed. They had paid the man who broke my bones. My father had financed my execution. My husband had calmly authorized it. Every ounce of agonizing pain I had endured in Switzerland, every scream that had torn from my throat during the titanium reconstructive surgeries, every single tear I had shed over the loss of my physical mobility. It was all meticulously purchased by the two men who were supposed to protect me. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not with sorrow. They were vibrating with an energy that was entirely terrifying. The last fragile, microscopic thread of humanity that tied me to the concept of family snapped, dissolving into ash. I looked up at Harrison. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was waiting for my command. "The gloves are off, Harrison," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, a hollow, metallic rasp devoid of any mercy. "I don't just want them bankrupt anymore. I want them in cages. I want to utterly destroy them." "The financial execution is already scheduled for this afternoon," Harrison confirmed, his eyes hardening. "Nemesis Holdings is initiating the margin calls." "Execute it," I commanded, picking up my diamond-encrusted cane and standing up. "Bring this guy down on their heads." 20 miles south, in a sprawling, excessively modern office overlooking Central Park, Valerian was standing before a massive mirror, adjusting the Windsor knot of a bespoke silk tie. He was humming a light tune, admiring his own reflection. He believed he was at the absolute apex of his life. He had the Tribeca penthouse, the beautiful mistress, the luxury cars, and a rapidly expanding firm. He had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes had just ceased to exist. At exactly 3 p.m., the bloodbath began. Valerian's desk phone rang. It was a direct emergency line from his chief financial officer. He picked it up, expecting an update on a commercial lease agreement. "Valerian, we have a catastrophic problem." The CFO's voice was pitched in absolute hyperventilating panic. "Nemesis Holdings just called in the loans." Valerian frowned, examining his cufflink. "What do you mean they called them in?" "We have a structured repayment plan. Just wire them the monthly interest from the primary operating account." "You don't understand," the CFO shouted, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. "They didn't just call in the monthly interest. They invoked the toxic debt acceleration clause. They are demanding the entire principal balance immediately, $16 million, by close of business today." Valerian froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his heavily tanned skin a sickly, pallid gray. "That's impossible. That clause only triggers if we default on multiple covenants or if the collateral is deemed insufficient." "They claim the collateral is invalid," the CFO replied, sounding as though he were on the verge of tears. "And they didn't stop there. They've legally frozen our operating accounts, all of them. Payroll is blocked. Our escrow accounts are locked. We can't move a single dollar. And Valerian, the front desk just called. There is a team of corporate liquidators from Nemesis Holdings in the lobby right now, escorted by private security. They have a court order to seize the physical assets of the firm." The phone slipped from Valerian's sweaty hand, clattering against the polished desk. He didn't have time to process the destruction of his company before his personal cell phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was an automated, high-priority alert from his private banking institution. Alert: immediate foreclosure proceedings initiated. Property: Tribeca Penthouse. Creditor: Nemesis Holdings. Reason: non-payment and breach of mortgage covenants. He stared at the glowing screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Everything he had built over the last 18 months, the entire fraudulent empire he had constructed on the foundation of my blood, was evaporating into thin air in a matter of seconds. The shadow bank wasn't just collecting a debt, it was performing a highly surgical, synchronized financial assassination. Frantic, breathless, and driven by pure animalistic panic, Valerian dialed Dominic's private number. The phone rang 6 times before it connected. "Dominic, listen to me," Valerian gasped, pacing the floor of his office like a trapped rat. "We have a massive problem. The lenders, Nemesis Holdings, they're accelerating the debt. They froze my accounts. They're foreclosing on the penthouse. I need capital. I need you to wire $5 million from Arabella's charity accounts right now to stave them off." There was no immediate response, only the sound of heavy, labored breathing on the other end of the line. "Dominic, did you hear me?" Valerian practically screamed. "I can't." Dominic's voice finally came through, sounding entirely unrecognizable. It wasn't the booming, arrogant voice of the patriarch. It was the raspy, terrified wheeze of a broken man. "The charity accounts, they're gone, Valerian." "What do you mean gone?" "The IRS," Dominic whispered, the sound of a slamming door echoing behind him. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division raided my offices an hour ago. Someone leaked the internal ledgers, the unredacted ones. They know about the offshore routing. They know the charity is a front. They froze everything. Arabella is practically catatonic in the drawing room. The feds took our passports, Valerian. We are ruined. Valerian stopped pacing. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of his stomach. But the trust, Elias's trust. You have the conservatorship. Pull the cash from the Montgomery Trust. Dominic let out a dark, hysterical laugh. I tried. I called the offshore holding firm in the Caymans 10 minutes ago to demand an emergency release of funds. Do you know what they told me? The conservatorship doesn't grant access to the principal. The money is locked. It was always locked. We never had $48 million, Valerian. We were spending ghost money. We are tens of millions of dollars in debt, the feds are auditing our entire lives, and we have absolutely nothing left to leverage. The reality of the situation crashed down upon Valerian with the force of a falling building. The ship wasn't just sinking. It had already hit the ocean floor. Dominic, we have to fight this. We have to hire defense attorneys. There is no we, Valerian, Dominic snapped, his survival instincts brutally severing any familial loyalty. You signed those commercial mortgages. You leased those cars. The debt is in your name. You deal with Nemesis Holdings. Do not call this number again. I am cutting my losses. The line went dead. Valerian stared at the phone, his hands trembling violently. Dominic had just thrown him to the wolves. He was completely, utterly alone, drowning in an ocean of debt, facing immediate homelessness and staring down the barrel of severe financial fraud charges. But Valerian was a coward, and a coward cornered will do absolutely anything to save his own skin. He didn't sit down and accept his fate. He didn't prepare a legal defense. He looked at the heavy, encrypted safe sitting in the corner of his office. He knew Dominic's secrets. He knew exactly how the money was laundered through the charity, because he had helped facilitate the real estate transactions that washed the cash. He knew the offshore routing numbers. He knew about the bribes paid to city officials for zoning permits. Valerian rushed to the safe, his fingers slipping on the digital keypad in his panic. He pulled out a stack of physical, unredacted ledgers and 3 heavily encrypted external hard drives. He shoved them into a leather briefcase, his mind racing. If he was going to burn, he wasn't going to burn alone. He would sell Dominic and Arabella to the federal government for a plea deal. He would trade his father-in-law's freedom for his own immunity. 2 hours later, under the cover of the rapidly intensifying winter storm, I watched the live surveillance feed from the comfort of my secure transport vehicle. The black SUV was parked discreetly on the upper level of a dimly lit concrete parking garage in Lower Manhattan. He's approaching the rendezvous point, Harrison noted, pointing to the monitor displaying the feed from a hidden camera we had planted on Valerian's vehicle weeks ago. On the screen, Valerian stepped out of his car, clutching the leather briefcase to his chest like a bulletproof shield. He looked pathetic. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes darted frantically at every passing shadow. A sleek, unmarked sedan pulled up beside him. A woman stepped out. She wore a sharp navy blue trench coat, her badge subtly visible on her belt. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, FBI White Collar Crimes Division. She was known for being ruthless, relentless, and entirely immune to the charms of Manhattan's corrupt elite. We had tipped her off to the meeting anonymously, ensuring she was the one Valerian contacted when he called the federal tip line an hour ago in a blind panic. Mr. Thorne, Agent Jenkins said, her voice echoing clearly through the directional microphones we had focused on the scene. You said you had actionable intelligence regarding the Ravenscroft Foundation. Valerian practically shoved the briefcase into her hands. I have everything, he gasped, his breath creating plumes of white vapor in the freezing air. I have the physical ledgers. I have the IP addresses of the offshore holding accounts in Belize. I have documented proof that Dominic Ravenscroft has been embezzling millions from his own charity for the last 5 years. Agent Jenkins opened the briefcase, shining a small penlight onto the top ledger. She flipped through a few pages, her expression remaining completely impassive. This is highly incriminating material. Why are you handing it over now? You are a named partner in several of his LLCs. This implicates you as well. I was coerced, Valerian lied smoothly, the desperation making him an excellent actor. He manipulated me. He threatened to cut my wife, my disabled wife, off from her medical care if I didn't facilitate the real estate transfers. I was just trying to protect my family. I let out a low, humorless chuckle from the back of the surveillance van. Protect my family. The sheer audacity of his cowardice was breathtaking. I'll give you everything you need to lock him away for a decade, Valerian pleaded, grabbing the sleeve of Jenkins' trench coat. I'll testify in open court, but I need guarantees. I need absolute ironclad immunity from prosecution, and I need witness protection. I need you to make the Nemesis Holdings debt disappear. Dominic set me up to take the fall for those loans. Agent Jenkins pulled her arm away, her face a mask of professional disgust. She looked at the pathetic, trembling man before her. The FBI does not negotiate away civil debt, Mr. Thorne, and we do not offer blanket immunity on the hood of a car in a parking garage. I will take this evidence to the U.S. Attorney. If the intelligence is as comprehensive as you claim, we will discuss a plea arrangement, but you are not walking away from this clean. You have to protect me, Valerian whined, his voice rising in pitch. Dominic will kill me if he knows I gave you this. He's a dangerous man. Oh, Valerian, I thought, leaning closer to the monitor. You have absolutely no idea who the truly dangerous person is. Do not leave the city, Mr. Thorne, Agent Jenkins ordered sharply, slamming the briefcase shut. We will be in touch. She got back into her unmarked sedan and drove away, leaving Valerian standing alone in the freezing concrete expanse of the parking garage, clutching his coat around him, completely unaware that his betrayal had been documented, recorded, and witnessed by the very woman he had tried to murder. He actually did it, Harrison murmured, shaking his head in a mixture of awe and disgust. He sold out his co-conspirators in less than 3 hours to save his own skin. There is no honor among thieves, I replied smoothly, adjusting the collar of my coat, and there is certainly no loyalty among murderers. I had the audio recording of the murder plot. I had Celestine securely bound by a $20 million morality clause, and now I had high-definition video and audio of Valerian turning state's evidence against his own father-in-law. The ammunition was fully loaded, the weapons were primed, the trap was sprung. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a calendar notification. Tonight, 8 p.m., the Ravenscroft Annual Christmas Eve Charity Gala, the Grand Ballroom, the Plaza Hotel. Despite facing total financial ruin and an impending FBI audit, Arabella and Dominic had stubbornly refused to cancel their lavish holiday gala. In their warped, narcissistic reality, projecting an image of absolute, unbothered wealth was their only remaining defense mechanism. They believed that if they threw the party of the century, if they poured enough vintage champagne down the throats of foreign investors and Wall Street executives, they could secure a miraculous bailout and save their collapsing empire. They were expecting a room full of saviors. They were expecting to toast to their resilience. They were not expecting the dead to walk through the front doors. Take me back to the penthouse, Harrison, I ordered, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen of my phone. I need to prepare. I have a party to attend. When I looked down at the diamond-encrusted cane resting against my leg, the execution was set. Tonight, under the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel, on the exact anniversary of the night they signed my death warrant, I was going to tear their entire world to shreds, piece by bloody piece. The Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a breathtaking monument to Gilded Age excess. Beneath the soaring gold-leaf ceilings, massive baccarat crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering amber glow over 300 of Manhattan's most elite, ruthlessly ambitious socialites, foreign investors, and Wall Street titans. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, white truffles, and the intoxicating, heavy perfume of old money. To the untrained eye, it was the pinnacle of high society elegance. But to me, watching the live, multi-angle security feeds from the back of a luxury SUV idling just off Fifth Avenue, the ballroom looked exactly like a beautifully decorated slaughterhouse. And the cattle were already wearing their finest jewelry. On the monitors, I observed my family working the room. The sheer, terrifying audacity of their performance was almost commendable. Dominic was aggressively holding court near the main ice sculpture, gripping a crystal tumbler of scotch so tightly his knuckles were bone white. He was sweating profusely through the collar of his bespoke tuxedo, desperately pitching a non-existent commercial waterfront development to a group of skeptical Qatari princes. He was trying to secure a multi-million-dollar lifeline before the federal indictments dropped in the morning. Arabella was strategically positioned by the towering 20-foot Christmas tree, her face pulled into a tight, excruciatingly fake smile. She was chatting with the wives of hedge fund managers, aggressively maintaining the illusion of the untouched, grieving, yet resilient matriarch. But her eyes were wild, darting constantly toward the ballroom doors, terrified that an IRS agent was going to walk through and publicly slap handcuffs on her wrists. Valerian was a complete, unmitigated disaster. He was hovering near the open bar, downing his third martini in under 20 minutes. He jumped at every sudden noise. He avoided eye contact with Dominic at all costs. He knew he had just sold his father-in-law to the FBI in a freezing parking garage hours earlier. He was a dead man walking, desperately trying to numb the profound, suffocating terror of his own cowardice. And then there was Celestine. She was the only one entirely oblivious to the rapidly collapsing perimeter. She stood in the very center of the dance floor, surrounded by a swarm of society photographers. She was wearing a custom, heavily beaded white silk gown that plunged to her navel, but the dress was merely an afterthought. All eyes were locked on her throat. Resting against her collarbone, catching the light of 1,000 flashbulbs, was the Stars of Eternity choker. The 20-carat flawless diamond, surrounded by a galaxy of smaller stones, looked magnificent. She posed, tilting her chin up, a smug, victorious smile plastered across her meticulously contoured face. She believed the necklace proved her supremacy. She didn't realize it was a $20 million noose, and I was holding the trapdoor lever. "They are all in position," Harrison murmured from the seat beside me, adjusting his silver tie. "The media correspondents from the major financial networks are stationed at the back. The doors have been secured by our private detail. No one leaves until the presentation is over." "And Agent Jenkins?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly cold. "Waiting in the service corridor with 6 armed federal agents. They are holding on your signal." I picked up the black, diamond-encrusted cane resting against my leg. I smoothed the skirt of my gown, a sweeping structural masterpiece of midnight blue silk that flowed like liquid vengeance. It was time. "Let's go, Harrison. It's rude to keep the guests of honor waiting on Christmas Eve." We stepped out of the SUV into the biting winter wind, bypassing the crowded red carpet by using the secure VIP entrance. We moved through the hushed, carpeted hallways of the plaza, flanked by my personal security detail. The muffled, rhythmic sound of the ballroom orchestra playing a lively waltz grew louder with every step. We reached the massive, heavy oak double doors leading into the grand ballroom. 2 of my security contractors flanked the entrance. "Cut the music!" I ordered through the hidden earpiece linked to the audio-visual booth upstairs, "and kill the house lights." Inside the ballroom, the sweeping waltz music abruptly stopped, mid-measure, with a jarring screech of cello strings. A second later, the grand chandeliers went entirely pitch black. A collective, startled gasp ripped through the crowd of 300 elites. The sudden, oppressive darkness sparked immediate murmurs of confusion and rising panic. I could hear Dominic's booming voice trying to project calm, demanding to know where the hotel manager was. "Hit the spotlight," I commanded. A single, blindingly bright, high-intensity spotlight snapped on, cutting through the darkness like a laser. It illuminated the grand, sweeping marble staircase that descended directly from the mezzanine into the center of the ballroom. The security guards pulled open the heavy oak doors. I stepped into the light at the very top of the stairs. I didn't rush. I didn't announce myself. I simply raised my right arm, gripped the handle of my cane, and took the first step down. Click. The sharp, heavy sound of the tungsten tip striking the marble echoed like a gunshot in the dead, silent, cavernous room. Click. Click, click. I descended the stairs with a slow, deliberate, predatory grace. The spotlight tracked my every movement, making the midnight blue silk of my gown shimmer and the black diamonds on my cane catch the harsh white light. I reached the landing halfway down and paused, looking out over the sea of upturned, completely stunned faces. The crowd parted instinctively, backing away from the bottom of the stairs, clearing a wide, empty circle in the center of the floor. I found them immediately. Dominic's Scotch glass slipped from his numb, trembling fingers, shattering into 100 pieces on the polished parquet floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his heavily tanned skin a sickening ashen gray. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in a silent, desperate attempt to reject reality. Arabella let out a sharp, breathless, strangled noise, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the hem of her gown, only catching her balance by grabbing a cocktail table. Valerian looked as though he had just seen a demon rise from the floorboards. He took 2 rapid steps backward, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and utterly terrified. He was looking at my legs. He was looking at the woman he had abandoned to a vegetative state, now standing upright, draped in power and wealth that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. And Celestine. Celestine didn't move. She stood frozen in the center of the cleared circle, the the stars of eternity choker suddenly looking very heavy around her neck. Her eyes darted from my face to my cane, her mind frantically, violently short-circuiting as she tried to process how the crippled, brain-dead sister she had mocked for 18 months was currently holding the entire Plaza Hotel hostage. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked directly toward the small stage at the front of the room, designated for the evening's speeches. Harrison shadowed me, a silent, imposing specter of legal doom. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, tapping the microphone once. The feedback whined softly, commanding absolute terrifying silence from the 300 billionaires, investors, and socialites in the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice was amplified, echoing off the gold leaf ceilings. It wasn't the soft, hesitant voice of the archivist. It was a voice forged in titanium and fire. I sincerely apologize for the dramatic interruption. But since this is a charity gala ostensibly dedicated to the spirit of giving and family, I thought it was only appropriate that the primary benefactor finally made an appearance. I locked eyes with Dominic, whose knees were visibly shaking. "For those of you who don't recognize me," I continued smoothly, "allow me to introduce myself. My name is Isolde Montgomery, sole trustee of the Montgomery Luxury Group, owner of Nemesis Holdings, and, unfortunately, the daughter, sister, and wife of the 4 biggest frauds currently standing in this room." A wave of shocked, scandalized whispers swept through the crowd. The high society guests immediately took another synchronized step back, physically distancing themselves from the Ravenscroft family as if they were suddenly highly contagious. "Isolde," Dominic croaked, his voice cracking, stepping forward with his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Isolde, sweetheart. My God, you're alive. It's a miracle. We were told you were—" "Save the performance, Dominic." I cut him off, my voice cracking like a whip. "There are no investors left to impress. The cameras are rolling, but they aren't here for your triumphant comeback. They are here for your autopsy." I turned my gaze to the woman standing frozen in the white silk gown. "Let's begin with the face of the family, shall we? Celestine." Celestine flinched as if I had struck her. "You look absolutely stunning tonight," I said, gesturing vaguely toward her throat. "That necklace truly belongs on someone who understands the weight of a contract. Speaking of which, I believe you recently signed a global ambassadorship with Leclerc." "You," Celestine stammered, her voice high and reedy, devoid of her usual arrogant bravado. "You own Leclerc?" "I own everything, Celestine," I corrected her softly, "including the morality clause you arrogantly signed without reading. The one that stipulates a $20 million penalty for public harassment, psychological abuse, and conduct detrimental to the brand." I didn't wait for her to respond. I pressed a button on the small remote in my hand. The massive 30-foot digital projection screen behind the stage flickered to life. It didn't display the Ravenscroft Foundation logo. It displayed a highly stabilized, color-corrected, blaringly loud video. It was the footage from the ICU on Christmas Eve. The audio boomed through the stadium-quality speakers, filling the ballroom. "It's so sad," Celestine's voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers, dripping with sickening fake sympathy. The camera angle showed her leaning over my bruised, battered, tube-filled body. "She looks terrible in this lighting. Her skin is practically gray." The footage continued, showing her perfectly contoured face posing for a selfie mere inches from my heavily bandaged head, while Arabella's hands ruthlessly stripped the antique diamond pendant from my neck in the background. "Oh, Mom, it's gorgeous. Do you think the lighting in here is good enough for a quick video? My followers have been so worried about my mental health." The ballroom erupted. The sheer, grotesque narcissism and cruelty of the video, played before the highest echelon of New York society, was absolutely devastating. The wives of the hedge fund managers covered their mouths in horror. The Qatari princes looked at Dominic with open, undisguised disgust. I paused the video on a freeze frame of Celestine smiling into her phone camera while I lay helpless behind her. I looked down at her. She was hyperventilating, her hands clawing desperately at the white silk of her gown. "As the active chairwoman of the Montgomery Luxury Group," I announced clearly, "I am publicly terminating your contract with Leclerc effective immediately. Furthermore, the $20 million liquidated damages penalty has just been legally triggered. Since you have absolutely no liquid capital, my legal team has already filed the paperwork to seize your personal bank accounts, your vehicles, and the highly leveraged Tribeca penthouse you currently reside in." You are entirely, irrevocably bankrupt, Celestine. You are leaving this hotel with nothing but the dress on your back. Celestine let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the polished floor, sobbing uncontrollably, ripping at her own hair. The illusion of her supremacy shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. I didn't offer her a single ounce of pity. I shifted my gaze to the two men standing on the periphery of the circle. Now, I said, my voice dropping into a dark, lethal register that made the room fall completely silent again. Let's address the true architects of this evening, Dominic, Valerian. Valerian actually whimpered, trying to hide behind a tall floral centerpiece. Dominic stood rigidly, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors, which were heavily guarded. The financial ruin was easy, I told them, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room. Nemesis Holdings was a simple mathematical trap, and you both walked into it because your greed completely eclipsed your intelligence. You spent 18 months borrowing millions of dollars from the very woman you thought you had buried. You are financially ruined. But unfortunately for you, financial ruin is a civil matter, and I require something far more permanent. I clicked the remote a second time. The screen behind me went black. The ballroom was plunged into shadows, save for the single spotlight on me. The audio that played next wasn't from a brightly lit ICU. It was dark, muffled, accompanied by the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers and the hum of an SUV engine. The lawyers confirmed it this morning. Dominic's recorded voice boomed through the room, sounding ruthless and impatient. Elias actually did it. He's putting the entire $48 million into a blind trust. And he's naming Isolde as the sole trustee. I watched Valerian's face physically collapse as he recognized the audio. He realized, in that split second, that I had hacked his personal biometric server. He realized I had everything. The recording played on, unspooling their murderous conspiracy for the entire world to hear. A commercial freight truck, Valerian's recorded voice suggested, cold and calculating. Those drivers work insane hours. Black ice, poor visibility. It's a tragic, unavoidable accident. For $500,000 wired to an offshore account in Belize, he'll make sure the truck crosses the center median at the exact right moment, Dominic's voice confirmed. The SUV is heavy. Her little sedan won't stand a chance. Gasps of sheer, unadulterated horror ripped through the crowd. This wasn't just white-collar fraud or family drama anymore. This was a premeditated, cold-blooded conspiracy to commit murder, broadcasted to 300 witnesses and a dozen financial journalists with their recording devices actively rolling. Dominic's face turned violently purple. He whipped his head around, staring at Valerian with a look of pure homicidal rage. He knew Valerian had driven that SUV. He knew Valerian was the only one who had access to that specific dashcam backup. "You recorded it?" Dominic roared, spit flying from his lips. He didn't care about the crowd anymore. He lunged at Valerian, grabbing him by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo. "You stupid, arrogant, cowardly little worm! You kept a recording of our conversation?" "Get off me!" Valerian shrieked, struggling frantically, trying to pry Dominic's heavy hands off his throat. "I had to protect myself. You were going to set me up. I should have paid the driver to hit you." Dominic bellowed, slamming Valerian backward against a table, sending crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The two men, the supposed pillars of Manhattan real estate, devolved into a pathetic, violent brawl right there on the floor of the Plaza Hotel. They punched, scratched, and tore at each other's tailored suits, rolling in spilled champagne and shattered glass, completely destroying the last remaining shreds of their dignity. I watched them tear each other apart with absolute, terrifying indifference. It was the most cathartic, beautiful violence I had ever witnessed. "Wait," I said softly into the microphone. "Don't tear him apart just yet, Dominic. You haven't seen his final act of loyalty." I clicked the remote a third, final time. The screen lit up with the high-definition infrared video from the concrete parking garage just a few hours ago. "I have everything." Valerian's face appeared on the 30-foot screen, his breath pluming in the cold air, shoving the leather briefcase into Agent Jenkins' hands. "I have the physical ledgers. I have documented proof that Dominic Ravenscroft has been embezzling millions from his own charity for the last 5 years. I'll give you everything you need to lock him away for a decade, but I need guarantees. I need absolute, ironclad immunity." Dominic froze, his fist suspended halfway in the air over Valerian's bloodied face. He slowly turned his head to look at the massive screen, processing the ultimate, final betrayal. Valerian hadn't just kept a recording. He had actively, willingly sold Dominic to the federal government to save his own pathetic skin. Dominic let out a guttural, animalistic roar of absolute despair. He dropped Valerian and stumbled backward, clutching his chest, his empire, his freedom, and his family completely annihilated in the span of 15 minutes. "You wanted immunity, Valerian?" I asked, leaning into the podium, my voice echoing with finality. "Unfortunately, I don't think the U.S. attorney is going to offer a plea deal to a man caught on tape orchestrating the attempted murder of his own wife." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom burst open for a third time. Special Agent Sarah Jenkins strode into the room, her badge clipped prominently to her belt, followed by 6 heavily armed federal agents in tactical gear. They didn't pause to admire the chandeliers. They moved with swift, brutal efficiency. "Dominic Ravenscroft, Valerian Thorn," Agent Jenkins barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, federal tax evasion, and money laundering." 2 agents hauled Dominic to his feet, roughly pulling his arms behind his back and snapping the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He didn't fight them. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of a man staring blankly at the floor. Valerian tried to scramble away, crawling backward on the parquet floor, leaving a trail of blood from a cut on his forehead. "No, I gave you the ledgers. We had a deal, Jenkins. We had a deal." "The deal was contingent on you not being a murderer, Mr. Thorne," Jenkins replied coldly, nodding to an agent who effortlessly hauled Valerian up and slapped the cuffs on him. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you finally use it." Across the room, 2 more agents approached Arabella. She was backed against a pillar, clutching her pearls, her face streaked with ruined mascara. "Arabella Ravenscroft," the agent stated, pulling out a second pair of cuffs. "You are under arrest for accessory to medical fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." "Don't touch me!" Arabella shrieked, her aristocratic facade entirely obliterated. "I am a victim. They manipulated me. Isolde, tell them. I'm your mother." I looked at the woman who had stripped my wedding ring off my paralyzed hand. I looked at the woman who had agreed to lock me in an asylum to steal my grandfather's money. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "I have no mother," I said simply. "Take the trash out, Agent Jenkins." The ballroom remained utterly silent, save for the pathetic, echoing sobs of Celestine on the floor, as Dominic, Arabella, and Valerian were forcefully marched out of the grand ballroom. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. I stood at the podium, the blinding spotlight still shining down on me. I looked out at the terrified, silent crowd of Manhattan's elite. They were looking at me, not with the condescension they used to reserve for the quiet archivist, but with absolute, terrifying reverence. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up my black diamond cane, stepped down from the podium, and walked out of the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, entirely too terrified to breathe until I was gone. Justice, I have learned, is not a singular event. It is a slow, grinding, deeply satisfying process. A year later, the sprawling, historic Ravenscroft estate in Connecticut, the crown jewel of Dominic and Arabella's superficial empire, went up for public auction after Nemesis Holdings finalized the foreclosure. I bought it for pennies on the dollar. I didn't move in. I brought in a fleet of bulldozers and contractors. We tore out the extravagant marble foyers, the wine cellars, and the pretentious manicured gardens. We stripped the house down to its absolute bones and rebuilt it. Today, the brass plaque on the front iron gates no longer reads the Ravenscroft Estate. It reads the Elias Montgomery Sanctuary. It is a fully funded, heavily secured, state-of-the-art rehabilitation and safe house facility for victims of severe domestic, financial, and medical abuse. We provide free legal counsel, elite medical care, and a secure place for women to rebuild their lives when the people who were supposed to protect them became their abusers. I used the very bricks of their vanity to build a fortress for the vulnerable. I used the money they tried to kill me for to ensure no one else would ever be silenced the way I almost was. As for them, Dominic and Valerian are currently serving consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal penitentiary. They are housed in separate cell blocks, reportedly spending their days blaming each other for their total destruction. Arabella accepted a plea deal, trading her designer gowns for a fluorescent orange jumpsuit. She is serving 15 years in a minimum security facility tasked with doing the prison laundry. And Celestine, The multi-million-dollar judgment against her is permanent. She is legally barred from profiting off any social media platform. The last report Harrison gave me indicated she was working the graveyard shift at a budget diner in New Jersey. 50% of her minimum wage wages automatically garnished and redirected straight into the sanctuary's funding account. She will be paying me back until the day she dies. I stood on the pedestrian walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge, the collar of my heavy wool coat turned up against the biting winter wind. It was Christmas Eve, the anniversary of the night I died and the night I was truly born. The city skyline glowed with festive lights reflecting off the dark, churning waters of the East River below. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was my platinum wedding band. The police had recovered it from Celestine's seized jewelry box. I held it between my gloved thumb and forefinger, feeling the cold metal that had once symbolized a promise of eternal love and protection. It felt utterly weightless now. It held no power. It held no pain. I didn't hesitate. I flicked my wrist, sending the ring arching over the heavy steel cables of the bridge. I didn't even watch it hit the dark water. I simply turned around, gripping the handle of my diamond cane, and began the walk home. My limp was still there, but my stride was unbreakable. The past was at the bottom of the river, and the entire world belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you stayed until the end, you know that sometimes the deepest betrayals forge the strongest armor. If you want to hear more stories of survival, justice, and absolute retaliation, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and never, ever let them think they've won.